First Christian Baptist Church, Mount Carmel.
We don't know what it is.
Hill.
It's First Baptist, First Christian, we're not really sure.
Here it is.
Mercy, mercy, mercy.
So
This is crazy.
this church, the cornerstone was laid 1902. Town of Pine Bluff, bustling, locomotion, trains.
Yeah.
Like that's what they're booming because of all the train industry. Of course, time goes on. And not only is this church in disrepair, but as you guys saw, we were driving up, most of the town
Yeah, most of the town seems to be.
is in disrepair. Just because like time changes and things change. And you saw these signs, you were telling us like there's these signs. What were the signs saying?
Keep moving forward. It's like it appears to be some kind of a mantra for the whole community. It's like we're continuing to push forward. Let's keep pushing forward, but I don't know.
Where do you go?
Yeah.
How do you do it?
How do you how far gone can you be?
Right. Never too far gone.
Yes,
that's
that's
kind
it.
of our point. That's kind of our point. And I think like one of the biggest things that we should be thinking about is that this wasn't like this sort of drift of a town, of a community. Like this wasn't the dream. This didn't happen on purpose. Nobody woke up and said, our goal is that this is going to be in ruins. Like it never happens that way. It's always just like this little decision or this thing or something changes and then you wake up one day and then this is where you're at.
Yeah, it's, I was just looking at this on the floor where it says God did it. Feels very past tense. I wonder how many people watching this series have this mind, kind of this feeling of, I remember when I was close to the Lord. I remember when God did incredible things in my life. Like I remember it, but I don't feel like He's doing it now. And I don't know, did He move? Did I move? Like,
That's
that
solid.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably for the church.
But He's still doing it. God's still doing stuff.
Yep.
I mean,
that's this one.
That's that one. There you go. Okay.
The Holy Bible. Yeah, I found that on the floor over there too.
Yeah, A.W. Tozer says, whatever God has done anywhere, He can do here. Whatever God has done for anyone, He can do for you.
Oh, that's good.
And whatever God has done at any time, He can do now.
Yeah.
And God did it.
Yeah.
He can do it again. That's really solid.
Well, and I think the key is that even if the church building is in disrepair, the legacy of what took place here, you start thinking about what the moments that people have had. I mean, this has been several different churches since the 1950s, but at least that's what we were told. And you think about all the people whose lives have been impacted, and then their children and their grandchildren and their children, and you just think of all these generations that even though people may not be having the same experience in this building, God's not done with anybody.
Yeah. And I love the stained glass. I love like the detail and the beauty of it. You can just tell like it was built with love, and you were going to come in here and it was going to be like you knew this was a place of worship, and you knew something special was going to happen here because it was beautiful and set apart. It was different than most of what else you would experience back in 1902. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you think about stained glass, the reason for stained glass is obviously the light shines through it. It's not beautiful if you're outside right now looking at that stained glass. But if tonight the lights were on in here and shining through that glass, then it looks beautiful. And vice versa, if you're here on a Sunday morning, maybe before electricity, right?
Yeah.
Before everybody had electricity, these windows, shine in beauty, which is, symbolic, of course, to me at least.
Light shining.
So at the risk of making myself sound like a complete and total moron, I'm going to tell you a story of something that happened to me in my senior year of high school. There was a girl named Sorrentha. We were really close friends. I asked her to go to prom with me, but just a few weeks later, I started dating Lori. Now, Lori and I were having a really good time in our relationship, but I'd already made a commitment to go to prom with Sorrentha. That wasn't the problem. The problem was I kind of fell for Sorrentha the night of the prom. Problem was I liked them both, and thought it sounded like a good idea that even though they went to the same high school, even though we were all involved in the same youth group, I thought to myself, maybe I could have my cake and eat it too. You know, don't hate the play, I hate the game. But when I think about it, and here's what I learned. If you have 2 girlfriends, you really have no girlfriend. Which this reminds me of one of my favorite stories in all the Bible. It's found in 1 Kings chapter 17 and 18. It's the story of the showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah. Now, this story is really interesting, and most of the time we get to the big fireworks where God sends down lightning from heaven. But before we get there, we have to ask ourselves the question, why was this showdown necessary in the first place? And the answer is a thing called religious syncretism. Now, you might not even know what that word means. You can think of a word or a clock that gets synchronized. That's where chronos comes from. But to syncretize means to take 2 things, to bring them together, to synthesize them into one. This is exactly what happens when it comes to religions, particularly some of the old pagan cult religions found in the New Testament. And this is exactly what's happened when Ahab and Jezebel have brought together these prophets of Asherah and these prophets of Baal, and they have kind of merged it with Jehovah worship, which is so strange that they continue to worship Jehovah, but now it's become distorted. It's become impure, if you will. And so Elijah gets to this moment where he has to confront them face to face. And here's what it says in the text. So Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Standing before him are all the prophets of Baal, all the prophets of Asherah, and he gives them the option for complete and total moral abandonment, lordship completely to Jehovah, and the people answer not a word. My concern is that much of this has happened to us. I suspect that very few of you rubbed an Asherah pole when you walked out of the house this morning. I don't suspect that any of you stopped by a Baal shrine and spent a lot of time there, but you may also be guilty of syncretizing. The church certainly has been. It's both individual and corporate. It's a temptation that every single one of us face, to take something of the world and combine it with something of God. Remember what they were doing in this story in 1 Kings chapter 17 and 18. They were taking a little of Baal, a little of Asherah, a little of Jehovah. They put it together and they thought that they would have everything. They would cover all of their bases. But in reality, they had nothing. The same thing is true for you. We think we take a little bit of God and a little bit of the world and we put it together, think we have everything, when in reality, we've got nothing. You've got 2 girlfriends. You've got no girlfriend. We see this in the church oftentimes play out when it comes to materialism. We treat people that if they pay their church dues, then they don't have to worry about what they spend with the rest of their money or how they spend the rest of their money, which is contrary to the way that the Bible would actually teach it, that our faith informs all of our financial decisions. Or maybe it's our politics. There's certainly been an unholy marriage here of late, really on either side of the aisle, how people have taken their faith and they've kind of merged it with their political views. And so you've got an American flag and a cross on the same stage because you've somehow or another turned it into this American Christianity. You see, the gospel is true everywhere, and it could be accomplishment, it could be status, it could be that a church has done so well, it's an amazing institution, it's a business, sometimes we say, and certainly there's elements of that, but it's important to never forget that that's just something that has to be done, and the driving force is always our faith. The American dream, you can imagine how this plays out in most of our lives, that we think that God's objective is to make us healthy and wealthy and wise, that the pursuit of happiness is the most important thing, and we've completely forgot the pursuit of holiness. We've syncretized the wrong things. Athletics, I've got to be honest, this one hurts me just a little bit, and you might think that it's okay to kind of dive headfirst into athletics because there's a lot of athletic metaphors in the Bible, and quite frankly, you're in favor of prayer before the game begins. But if that has become your faith, the source of your faith, the central part of your faith, then you have missed it. And I find this with relationships, I find this with status, I find this with job, that there is a temptation for us to syncretize our faith with these other idols. Not as obvious as Baal or Asherah, but those weren't obvious to them back in those days. So in the greatest sermon ever preached, called the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You cannot syncretize two different gods. What happens for most of us is we buy into the lie that if we get a little bit of God and a little bit of the world, then we'll have everything, when in truth we have nothing. They thought a little Baal, a little Asherah, a little Jehovah will have everything, but in truth they had nothing. It was an empty faith. The syncretism had destroyed everything. So have you ever been to a buffet? It seems like it would be the greatest thing in the world that you have all of these options in front of you, but the options don't really help. For me, I struggle mightily, and the reason why is because I go through the line and I want to get prime rib from the carving station, and I want to get a little sushi, and then I want to get some fried chicken and some meatloaf, and then I want some pizza, and it just never really gets kind of any synergy because I'm trying to syncretize a bunch of different kinds of food. I think for most of us, we think that the best philosophy is to make sure that we don't put all of our eggs in one basket, when in reality, that's exactly what God calls us to do. You see, there's a showdown for your heart that kind of exists right there in this moment in front of you, and you've got to make a decision. Will I completely and totally commit in that moment? Let me be Elijah to you. Let me ask you, how long will you waver between two opinions? How long will you chase after two lovers? Or will you completely and totally abandon for what God has put in front of you? A little of God, a little of the world, you think you have everything, but in truth you have nothing. But if you put all your eggs in that basket, if you give everything to the Lord, that no matter what it is that's around us in culture, no matter what narrative is being pushed, we recognize that our faith is what is driving us. That you and I, we are not bodies that have a spirit. We as believers are a spirit who live inside of a body. And so we must make sure that that core spiritual identity of who we are informs every single thing about what we do. Don't let yourself buy into the lie. It's not a little of God and a little of the world thinking you have everything, because in truth you have nothing. But in Jesus Christ, you have it all. Walk in that this week. Share with your group about what it means to syncretize in some areas in which you've been kind of tempted to do so, where you've been two-timing God, if you will. This would be a great discussion point. This is an opportunity for every one of you to sit, to soak, to absorb the centrality and single-mindedness of Christian thought. God bless you. Have a great week.